Hi, this is Greg Suddy, Suddy on Soccer, and I am here with goalkeeper and coach Mark Litton. It is a real honor. It's a pleasure to have you on board, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Suddy. It's about time. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for you to get me on your show.
Nice. So there's so many conversations that we can have, and I look forward to having as many as we possibly can have in the time we have today. What I'd like to start with, and this is going to be brand new information for me because I don't know. Where did you grow up? Give me a little bit about your school, your youth and school and high school and that kind of thing. Talk a little bit about your youth.
Sure. So, Catholic military family. There's 6 of us. I have a twin brother. We were the youngest. Traveled all over. I was born on an Air Force base in Florida. Before I was a year old, we moved to England. My dad was stationed in France, and we were there for 2.5 years before moving back stateside. So we ended up in Racine, Wisconsin, which is about 22 miles south of Milwaukee, where I live now, because that's where my mom was originally from. So we grew up in my mom's house. But I was your typical kid. I played lots of sports growing up: football, baseball, basketball. Baseball was my go-to. That was the sport I had gravitated towards and thought that was going to take me through my athletic career. But I was 15 years old when I kicked my first soccer ball. And it was actually an interesting story. My sister's boyfriend was coaching a rec soccer team, didn't have enough players, asked me if I'd be interested in playing. And I'm like, sure, I'm an athlete. I can do that. And I loved it. I was not a goalkeeper. I played in the back. I was a defender, and I just instantly fell in love. And I basically never picked up a different ball ever again. Fast forwarding from there, I mean, I'm 15. I'm a sophomore in high school. My junior year in high school, we petitioned my high school. We didn't have a soccer team, but we petitioned to get a soccer team, and they granted us a club program my junior year. And then the fall of my senior year, just 2 years into playing, we got a varsity team. I was the captain of the team, ended up being MVP, and then I made like all county, all conference as a defender. As a defender, yes. The early part of my career, probably the first 5 years playing, I played in the back. Back then it was stopper sweeper, but it was more or less like a center back.
Right.
So there was 5 years between when I played my last high school game before I played my first college game, because and that's a completely different story, but I was working full time. I was going to college part time. So coming from a military family, I had 3 brothers. My dad was career Air Force. My older brother was career Marines. My other older brother was Navy. My twin brother was Marines. I went to college. I was the black sheep. So when I turned 18, my dad gave me a present of, you can now go live by yourself somewhere and chase your school dream. So I was on my own at 18. That's why I was working full time, and I was taking classes part time, and I was playing club soccer. And this is where I eventually fell into the goal. Is our goalkeeper on my club team broke a finger during a game, and we didn't have a backup goalkeeper. And being a center back and already being the vocal leader in the back, I said, okay, I'll jump in. I'll get you through this game. And it was like this light bulb went off. I'm 5'8". I'm going now. I don't have to go up and head crosses. I can just go up and catch crosses. So it kind of stuck. I stayed in there, and I played in the goal. And fast forwarding a little further, my club team scrimmaged against the university where I was going, University of Wisconsin Parkside. At the time, it was an NAIA school, and I was in goal. And the head coach at Wisconsin Parkside knew I was a student there. Well, we beat them, and I had a great game in goal. And he approached me, and I'm going to date myself now. This was in the fall of 1985. And he asked me if I'd be interested in walking on the next season. And I said, well, I'll try to figure out full-time hours to be able to do it. Because again, I was a part-time student, but I made it work. And there were 5 goalkeepers in preseason, and I got the starting spot. And 2 weeks in, he gave me a full scholarship because he knew I needed it, and I earned it. So by the time I started playing in college, I only had 3 years of eligibility. My senior year, I set 2 or 3 national records. I was an All-American. I was the team MVP. So I was the MVP of my high school team as a defender. And then I was an MVP of my senior year in college as a goalkeeper. But my love for the game really started in 1984 when the Milwaukee Waves started.
Yep.
Because then I decided I wanted to be a goalkeeper.
I get it. So up to this point, of course, you're playing outdoor soccer, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So the Milwaukee Wave kicks off, and you go to a game as a fan, and you sort of take in this indoor sport.
That's right.
What's your take as a player, as a goalie? I mean, I would think, before you answer the question, Mark, I would think as a goalie you're a little intimidated. I'm just saying, from a complete rookie as far as that position is concerned, I would think a goalie would be a little intimidated about the fast, rapid pace and the short distance of shots and that kind of thing coming from the outdoor game.
Honestly, being a 5'8" center back, I had to be more physical than most players because I had to win a lot of challenges in the air. And so I took that with me into the goal. And I always told people that in college, I was a 5'8" goalkeeper, but I played like I was 6'4".
Nice.
So that didn't bother me. What bothered me about the outdoor game is there was long stints of time where I was just bored because I'm standing back there. We were beating teams, and I never saw any of the ball.
Yep.
And when I was at the very first Wave game, and it was a new level of love. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an indoor goalkeeper. So I'll share where that journey then took me. So I'm still in college, and I was playing for a local club team in Milwaukee, Croatian Eagles, and John Dolinsky, who was a player with the Wave in the early days and then went on to be the head coach, was my teammate. He was playing for the Croatian Eagles, and I pulled him aside and I said, John, I'd love to become a professional goalkeeper indoors. What do I need to do? So he actually, after my last college game, he invited me to come and start training indoors. So I was going to Milwaukee in between classes my senior year to train with the Wave that winter. And then the following season, the 89-90 season, I came in and I ended up being one of 2 players that signed a development contract. So back then, a development contract was you had all your players on contract, and then there were 2 of us who were like the reserve players.
So
and
Mark,
we were on.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. So now this is right out of college, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
John Dolinsky. I mean, again, I was very fortunate because I was the goalkeeper for the outdoor team that he was also playing with. So he had plenty of opportunity to see me play. And then giving me the opportunity to come in while I was still in school and periodically train gave him more opportunity to see me play. And so I was then the third keeper that first season, 89-90. Unfortunately, John left that year after that season. Johan Arnio came in, and Johan had the team for 2 years. And Yes, because Johan came out of San Diego.
Right.
He was under Ron, and Johan and I didn't have the same relationship that John and I had. And I stuck around. I still third goalkeeper, wasn't getting any games. I left, after that third season, but second season under Johan, I left for a year. But then that's when Keith came in, Keith Tozer. So
Right.
Keith came in 92, 93. Well, I came back 93, 94 and was the third keeper again. And John Howard was the second keeper and Victor Noguera was the first keeper. And Victor was my idol. I mean, he's the guy when I wanted to, his style was the style I was trying to emulate. So I went from being this googly-eyed fan of Victor Noguera to training with him every day. And that was awesome. And I had opportunities to go somewhere else where I could have possibly played, but Milwaukee was my home. And I look back now and I see I got more value out of being a third keeper with the Waves than I would have ever gotten going somewhere else where I could have been, second keeper or first keeper. So I cherish that opportunity because it also built the foundation of where I am today in my career. Because that's when Keith and I first crossed paths and started building our relationship.
Right. Yeah. Well, Victor was an impact player in San Diego before he went to Milwaukee.
Right.
He had a long career, and a much longer career than most goalkeepers have. I mean, that guy played for a long time, and to work underneath him and to learn underneath him, that's kind of an interesting story in a lot of sports, where you get guys that are sort of the protege coming up, playing underneath the master, so to speak, and learning all the trades, the tricks of the trade directly and in person, and then being able to apply those things not only as they were taught, but also to integrate them into your own style of play.
Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers is a classic example.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, you mentioned what city was it that you grew up in south of Milwaukee?
Racine.
Do you know where Zion, Illinois is?
What's that?
Do you know where Zion, Illinois is?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah, that's where my father was born. My father was born and raised in Zion.
Small world.
Yeah, it is a small world. I mean, that's really close. I mean, it's got to be close because I don't know where Racine is, but I know that Zion is only like 40 miles south of Milwaukee. So
yes, Zion is just over the border, and Racine is about 25 miles north of the border.
Okay, all right. Yeah, his years growing up, I remember him telling me stories about spiriting off to Waukegan, with his high school buddies, and that whole area is I visited it a few times before when my mom and my grandma and grandpa still lived there. But yeah, it's a pretty small world. So you played with the Milwaukee Wave for a long time.
Well, I always say when I tell people about my time, I'm very selective with my wording. I will say I was with the Milwaukee Wave from 89 through 94. I don't say I played with the Milwaukee Wave because technically I never played in a professional match. But that's okay. I came to terms with that because, again, just the opportunity and the experience and to live the professional lifestyle and train in that professional environment what built a lot of the core of what I do today. And as I mentioned earlier, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so I think this is where you're kind of going anyway. Where you are today is primarily coaching, and you've been coaching for a long time.
Yes.
And you've coached on a lot of different levels and in a lot of different locations. I mean, you've got coaching. We'll get to it in a little bit. U.S. national team stuff, You've coached outside of Milwaukee. You've coached in Milwaukee. What made you make that transition? Where did that happen?
It's interesting. And so there was a gap. There was a 10-year gap. So my last season indoors was 93, 94. But Art Kramer was moving into an assistant coaching role. Keith Tozer. I stayed close to the team, and periodically through the years, Art would call me if they needed a goalkeeper to come in, and so I'd go in and I'd jump into training sessions whenever they needed me. I was coaching youth outdoor soccer, but fast forwarding in 2000, the year 2000, I became a personal trainer, and so I was working already in corporate America. I was working a full-time job, but then part-time I was working as a personal trainer, and I specialized in speed, agility, and quickness training. So in 2000, because I was still, going to training sessions, I had friendships with a lot of the players. I started a preseason camp, and I had about 5 or 6 of the Wave guys that for 4 weeks, 3 days a week, I put them through a 45-minute training program to get them ready for preseason. So it was a preseason. And I did that for 4 straight years. And those guys never got hurt. They were always the fittest guys coming into preseason. So when about halfway through the 2004-2005 season, Artie Kramer calls me. And they knew that I had been working with the guys and asked me if I'd be interested in a coaching position to come in and start working with their goalkeepers, because they had Nick Vorberg and Dan Green. They couldn't figure out which one should be their starting keeper. They were kind of in tandem, and Artie said, "Can you come in and work with them and do an assessment and tell us who you think should be the starting goalkeeper?" And I'm like, "Oh shit!" So I started going in twice a week. I would work with them for an hour in the morning before training sessions, and at the end, I said, "You know what? Nick is your guy." I mean, they're both great shot stoppers. Dan's got a great arm, but when it comes to an overall package, as it relates to distribution, Nick is your guy. He can go left foot, he can go right foot. So they ran with Nick the rest of the season.
Yeah.
And we won a championship.
Yep.
So I had only been with the team for half a season, and we won the 2004-2005 MISL championship. And that was awesome.
Wow.
And that was my start.
Yeah, that's huge.
So
that's huge. And especially coming off of your recommendation for keeper.
Yes. And Nick was my keeper then for the next 10 years that I was with the Wave.
Wow.
So that was my start on my professional coaching track. And keep in mind, ever since 1994, when I stopped playing, I've had a full-time corporate job. A lot of people don't realize that. They say, you coach here, you coach here, you coach here, you coach here. Oh, by the way, I have a full-time job too. I have become a master at time management. But
nice.
And I'll share with you that Keith Tozer has been probably the most influential coach in my life. He's one of my best friends. We developed a very, very strong relationship during those 10 years with the Wave that carried on after the Wave. And he is the one that showed faith, gave me an opportunity, and I like to believe I've never let him down and never plan to. But that also is what led to my other pathways to the coaching that I'm doing.
Sure. So talk about other things that you're doing right now. I mean, not just so much today, but just after you left the Wave, what other doors were open for you by that?
So well, let me just encapsulate some of what I've done. The opportunities that I've had, because I didn't stray away from the outdoor game too. I'm still part of the outdoor game because I had 9 years coaching at Division II and then another 6 years coaching at Division I. So I was still working outdoors. I also spent a couple seasons outdoors with NPSL and UPSL, so at lower semi-professional. Right. So I have still continued to work with outdoor goalkeepers. I was working with indoor goalkeepers. And then in 2008, Keith was the head coach of the U.S. men's futsal national team. And he invited me in to be his goalkeeper coach. And Nick Vorberg and Jeff Ritchie were the two goalkeepers. And it was I think it was March of 2008, and we had qualifiers coming up for the World Cup that year. Okay. And so I worked with Nick and Jeff, and we went to qualifiers, and we qualified for the World Cup. So in 2008, just being hired as a goalkeeper coach, I was with the team when we went to Brazil in, I want to say it was August of 2008 to play in the FIFA Futsal World Cup. It was an unbelievable experience. But then I stayed with Keith and the futsal national team all the way to 2016. When we went through our last cycle, we didn't qualify, and that was a time that we needed to part ways with the national team program. But I was with Keith there for 8 years. We were together for 10 years with the Milwaukee Wave. So now I'm working futsal goalkeeping. I'm working indoor goalkeeping. I'm working outdoor goalkeeping. So I'm
explain some of the differences, Mark. Explain some of the differences as to from a coaching standpoint. I mean, you can also include from a player standpoint, but explain some of the differences that are important from a goalkeeper's point of view of those three different styles of the sport. I think a lot of the people watching here are pretty, I mean, obviously everybody's familiar with indoor soccer and outdoor soccer. Futsal for some might be a common thing, but others, they might just hear the word and they've seen a game or two and not necessarily watched it. And it's on a smaller field, it's with a smaller ball, and it doesn't have any walls. The thing is, it's interesting to me, before we get to my question that I just asked, is when you're talking United States of America FIFA competition for futsal, you're talking about competing with players in countries that play this sport on a regular basis at the highest level possible all the time. And right. in the United States, that just isn't the case. I mean, our players are using it as a practice facility almost in order to hone their sport, in order to hone their game for the outdoor sport or the indoor sport or whatever. But I mean, and I'm not to say that it's not a seriously taken sport, but not to the level that it is in other countries.
Correct. And that, to me, it's the key to what's missing from our national team program, because futsal helps players solve problems. The small space, the less time to think, having to have, exceptional technical skills. Right. I always go back, Messi is Messi, not because of what he did in the outdoor game, but what he did playing futsal as a youth to learn how to solve problems in tight spaces. Messi's not dangerous in the flanks. Messi's dangerous in those tight spaces right in front of the goal where he knows how to solve problems and scores goals. We don't have
good point.
Because we don't have enough players who are playing small-sided and then integrating into the large-side game. Christian Pulisic, he surfaced out of nowhere, and he's like the All-American boy or All-American man now. But Christian Pulisic, his dad Mark, was with the Detroit Ignition. And so Christian was hanging around with Everton and Ricardinho and all the Brazilians playing futsal and playing indoor. And the kid at 12 years old was learning from some of the best how to manage small spaces. And he took that with him to the outdoor game, and it just accelerated his career. And if there were more players that would take futsal serious and learn how it can benefit their outdoor game, again, that's to me is the missing key. But as it relates to goalkeeping, you had asked the question, and I've put a lot of time into this, and really it's an area now I talk about. And I was at the coaches convention last year, and I was on 3 different podcasts. They sought me out because they knew I coached outdoor goalkeeping, indoor goalkeeping, futsal. And what I've done is I've torn down the barriers. I don't say, well, this is outdoor goalkeeping and this is indoor, this is futsal. I talk about it now as it relates to the space that you're defending as a goalkeeper. This is small space. This is intermediate space. This is large space, because those spaces exist in every version of the game. So what you do in a small space, it can be in futsal, it can be in indoor, it can be in outdoor. For example, in the recent World Cup, Martinez for Argentina makes a huge sprawling split save that it keeps them in the game, where also in that same game, Lloris, the goalkeeper, goes down in an old wide barrier and Di Maria just goes right over the top of him. So Lloris used an old version of what to do in a small space. Martinez used the new version of what to do in a small space, and the rest is history.
Interesting.
So that's the only way I can get coaches who are kind of that anti-futsal mindset to buy into the concepts, is I've taken the labels off of it. I said, I'm going to show you and I'm going to prove to you why this technique is most successful in small spaces. Again, whether you're indoor, you're futsal, or you're outdoor, it's not about the sport, it's about the space. Because you even have big spaces in futsal. If somebody shoots from half field, you're not going into a split save. You're doing exactly what you would do in an outdoor game if someone shot from a distance.
Right.
Light bulbs go off everywhere when I break it down and relay it to that simple of form.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, I'm having a wow moment right now just listening to it. I mean, it's seriously. I mean, it is. It perfectly makes sense, and it also does break down the barriers that you're talking about, as far as the mental state of the person you're talking to. Where I'm a traditionalist outdoor soccer player. To hell with all of this other stuff. Or outdoor soccer is, from a goalkeeper's position. Outdoor soccer is slow and boring. What are you talking about? I mean, I love this indoor game because it gives you activity. It makes you think. It keeps you in the game. But what you're doing is you're breaking down so that you're not even talking about those differences, because you're incorporating all of those differences into the same concept of thought.
Right. What that also does is it helps goalkeepers transition between the various, because there are some coaches that don't want their goalkeepers going indoors during the winter because they're thinking, it's going to ruin them when they come back outdoors, because they're not going to know how to be in front of a big goal. And again, it's not the size of the goal, it's the size of the space. The other part that I emphasize with coaches is the small space technique that I teach and want them to incorporate into the outdoor game. It's all about recovery. The way I teach it is it provides better recovery, because with the pace of today's game in the outdoor game, goalkeepers really aren't catching most shots anymore. They're blocking them. It's the second ball that they need to worry about. And if they're not in a proper position, body shape wise, to recover, they're not going to make the second save. And I also put a lot of emphasis on why they're going into this small space, changing their body shape and the positioning, because of the recovery aspects related to it.
Yeah. I mean, I see that happen all the time in the outdoor game. I mean, they'll parry the ball away, they'll block the ball away, and then it'll go right to the feet. In some cases, right to the direct feet of the guy who just shot the goal or took the shot. I mean, it goes directly to the same guy who just took the shot, and now you haven't recovered yet. The goalie is sprawled out on the field, and now he takes a shot over over basically an open goal. And so yeah, that recovery point is massive.
And I'll be at the coaches convention in LA in January again, and I'm sure that I'll be on several different podcasts talking about the same concepts. That Greg, a lot of my story, there's so much overlap with the people that have been influential in my life and the direction I've been able to go in with my career. Because there's still some areas I haven't talked about yet. So, men's football national team professionally. So after I left the Wave, I got offered the head coaching job with Cedar Rapids Rampage.
Right.
And I turned it down, but I told the owner, I said, Everton was playing there at the time. And Everton and I go all the way back to 2005 with Milwaukee Wave.
Yeah.
And he was playing there. And I said, if you make Everton the player head coach, I'll come and be his assistant coach. Because I said, now you're going to get me in a coaching role. Or if you don't make Everton the player head coach, I'm not coming. So they made me the player head coach, and he turned the program around. St. Louis next year. And he signed a 3-year contract to go to St. Louis and brought me with. Now, I never left Milwaukee. I was commuting. To Cedar Rapids. I commuted for 3 years to St. Louis to be by his side. And Everton worked me over when he went to Utica. And I said, I'm sorry. I went from a 10-minute drive downtown in Milwaukee to a 4-hour drive to Cedar Rapids to a 6-hour drive to St. Louis. You're not getting me to Utica, New York. I'm sorry. We could talk on the phone.
Oh, shut it. What are friends for, man?
Yes. Again, providing the opportunity, Everton and I mean, we have a very, as I shared, we have a very deep relationship. And he's the head coach of the men's football national team right now, and he's actually petitioning to have me added to his coaching staff because he says he doesn't trust his goalkeepers with anyone else. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not.
Well, I mean, that for one thing, I mean, you and I were talking before the show. You and I were talking a little bit about relationship, and I mean, and relationship is massive in life in general. But I mean, when you're able to nurture the depth of friendship, not just connections, not just contacts, not just people that you know and you've worked with, but actually people that you know and trust deeply, and can have the blessing of also working with them. It makes a huge difference in how things play out.
It does. If you think about in the world of professional sports, you can have a lot of relationships with individuals because you're thrust in the spotlights. People know who you are, but honestly, your trusted circle is very, very, very small. There's very few people within your circle that get to see the real you. Not to say, here's the example I would give. So Keith and I would sit we had a small office in the back of the arena, and we'd lose a game, and we'd sit back there and we'd talk, and then we'd go across the street to Major Goolsby's in Milwaukee to have dinner, and it never fails. You'd have a fan come up and they'd say, "So, Coach, what happened?" And it's like, well, they just were a little bit better prepared, and we just didn't execute. But I'm giving them the coach's answer, but the personal answer is, can't you see that I'm eating? Can you see that I just want to finish?
Right.
And just maybe put the game aside since it's done now. But when you hold that persona, you're held to a different level of expectation. And that's where I'm, you have individuals that are outside of that circle that, think that, I know Mark Litton, but yes, you do. And we do have a relationship. There's certain layers that you will never see because you're not inside of that circle. And Keith is inside of that circle. Everton is inside of that circle. I mean, those are two guys that, there's a level of trust that's, it's difficult to describe. And it's,
I mean, you guys have gone through the wars together, and not just through the professional wars together, but also then, have a social relationship, so that you talk about your family, you talk about, your situation going forward, you talk about your health issues, you talk about things like that are personal and private. And so that just brings that bond and relationship closer together, and that builds that trust even stronger.
We're like brothers, Everton and I, and Keith, because Everton and I have raised our families together.
Nice.
So it's, my son Nico calls him Uncle Evo.
Exactly. Of course he does.
Yes.
Yeah. I had those kind of relationships when I was a kid growing up. I mean, it's a little bit different for me now. I really don't have that kind of a thing with my son for any of my friends that were that close. But when I was growing up, my dad's college roommate was the best man in his wedding. Many years later, I am born, and he's still happening. And I grew up with his kids, and he was Uncle Jay.
Yeah.
I mean, so he was, so I mean, I understand exactly what you're talking about, and the depth of that, as far as, and it's really interesting because I can speak to that from your kids' point of view, because it was my dad that had that initial relationship, and those relationships last a lifetime. I mean, from the kids' point of view, I mean, that's my cousin. There's no blood relationship at all, but I mean, that's my cousin. I mean, that's my family. And it lasts, it literally lasts a lifetime. And I'm still involved in some of those relationships today as grown, old adults. And it makes, and even that even builds the relationship that you have with Everton, because watching our kids come together and live together, involve each other, in their lives and stuff, that's absolutely huge. Mark, talk a little bit about where the so are you involved in the futsal program anymore at all? You're not yet. Everton's trying to get you in there.
Yes, he is. But I am, with Keith, we are part of the U.S. Youth Futsal Program, which is an affiliate of U.S. Soccer, but it operates independently. And so Keith pretty much started that program with John Perry out of Kansas City. And now Keith and I travel across the country to do regional ID camps. We have a national ID camp in Kansas City every July. We typically have about 500 kids there. And out of that national ID camp, we pick 16 teams, 8 boys, 8 girls, and we take them on international trips. So this past August, we took our 6 youngest teams to Brazil to play in an international tournament with Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and us. Wow. And now in December, we're taking our 10 older teams to France to play some international friendlies in both Nantes and in Paris. So twice a year, we go on international trips. On top of where I just came back from.
Right. That is, well, I mean, that is huge for the youth, man. I mean, for them to get that international experience, the whole deal of traveling overseas, you're dealing with kids probably in a lot of cases who've never traveled overseas before. It may be their first time ever out of the country. And so, yeah. Wow. So before we start talking about where you just recently came back from, is there anything else is there anything else that you'd like to add to this journey in the discussion to take us into the modern day?
I think I've covered a lot. There's little bits and pieces here and there.
Right.
I'll throw in. So in 2012, Jurgen Klinsmann was still coaching the men's national team, and the U23s or the U20s. Well, it was the U20s were preparing for a World Cup, and there were players that were invited into a national team training camp. Well, the bubble players that weren't being invited, they were all 18, 19-year-old kids. Jurgen Klinsmann wanted a team to go and play in an indoor tournament in Germany, and they had reached out to Keith, but Keith wasn't available. So Keith recommended me. So I took the U.S. under 19 national team to an indoor tournament in Germany where we played against U20 professional clubs. Here's 12 kids who've never played any type of indoor. They're all outdoor players. I had one training session before our first game. We played a pro team out of Poland and we beat them 1-0. And it didn't matter.
Are you talking about?
What's that?
Are you talking about indoors with boards?
Yes. It was an indoor tournament. There were probably 3,000 or 4,000 people there every day watching this tournament because it was the U20 teams from all of these professional clubs throughout Europe, and we were invited in as a national team program. So that was like my first head coaching gig at a national team level, was taking the 19s to an indoor tournament in Germany, and then actually winning our first game, which they didn't expect us to win any games. And it was the only game we won, but I'll hang my hat on that. So I just want to add.
Go ahead.
Side nugget of something else I had the opportunity to do as I'm traveling this journey.
Go ahead.
I wanted to start talking about the mini football and how that all came about. And honestly, it came about by accident. And that's where I said there's so much overlap. So one of our female goalkeepers who came through our U.S. youth futsal program, she had been on probably 6 international trips. She came back after she was done, as a player, and we had her as on our coaching staff now. And it was July of 2021. And she said, I got invited into a training camp for the mini football women's team. And I'm wondering if you could just, put a good word in for me with the head coach. Well, the head coach was Craig Rodas, and Craig and I go back 100 years. And so I called Craig and I said, really is awesome. You're not going to find a better goalkeeper for mini football. And we talked. And next thing I know, Craig's asking if I'd be available to go to the training camp that he was bringing Braley in for. So I went to the training camp, and then the next thing I know, I'm on a plane with the team going to Kyiv, Ukraine, for the WMF Women's inaugural World Cup.
Right.
And we won it.
Right.
And my futsal goalkeeper won the Golden Glove by not giving up any goals the entire tournament. So that's how I got into mini football, and then it just expanded from there.
So before we go into your actual, so before we go into the actual conversation of your personal experience, let's talk a little bit about the sport itself. Because I think a lot of people are confused with why our indoor players are participating on a small outdoor field 6-a-side. And how that relates going back and forth. I mean, of course, you and I both know, as a lot of people watching do as well, that the first WMF World Cup was played in the United States on indoor fields with boards in 2015. And the United States won that tournament here in the United States. After that, it went to Tunisia and Australia. They skipped a spin with COVID, and then they end up very recently here in the UAE. And all of those tournaments were played as they were most recently on the small outdoor pitch with a six-a-side venue. But the six-a-side thing is consistent with our indoor soccer. Talk a little bit about about your feeling about how that works out, and explain, why it's our indoor guys that are playing in this tournament.
Sure. So the WMF actually now has the mini football, but then they also still have an arena World Cup, because that's coming to the United States again next year, and San Diego is going to be hosting it. But the reason, if you think about the indoor game, yes, we're playing in a rink, but the boards really aren't what makes the game special. It's what's happening inside of the boards. So the boards really don't make a difference whether these guys are playing inside of a rink or outside with touch lines, because it's what's happening inside of the lines or inside of the boards. Yes, there's some plays where they will incorporate the boards, but if you think about the game as a whole, most of it is played without the boards. So the mini football, it's all about the tactics and the strategy and the concepts that we play in our version of mini football, which is indoor soccer. It's the exact same thing that we can do in the mini football game, playing outdoor on a small field. A lot of the teams there brought their futsal teams. Georgia, it was their futsal national team, because it's very similar to the game. It's like a hybrid between our version of indoor soccer and futsal.
Right.
But we will always be one of the top teams in mini football, whether there's boards or not, because it really comes down to the tactics of 5v5 plus keepers.
Right.
We were actually rated as one of the top 5 teams going into this last World Cup.
That's right. And the commentators on watching the games early in the tournament gave high regards to the United States and to Mexico coming into, obviously Mexico because of the defending championship thing, but and to the United States as well going into the tournament. And of course, I mean, it's like what you guys, let's move into the current event. The United States plays Romania, ties Romania 0-0, and they go on to win the tournament outright. I mean, maybe not outright. I mean, it was 14 penalty kicks or something like that. But what an interesting way to finish a tournament. But they turned out to be the eventual champions. And the other thing that I take note in is that Mexico lost to Kazakhstan, which was the other finalist, in a 2-1 game that went to overtime. I mean, Mexico played them to overtime 2-1. So the United States and Mexico just happened to come across in the ladder of things, just came across the teams at the wrong place and time. And won against the ultimate, lost rather against the ultimate winners and finalists. But talk a little bit about this last tournament. I know you had a blast.
Sure. I'm going to actually rewind a little bit because how I got involved with the men's team.
Okay, do that.
Last year in October, a year ago, October, we took both the men's and the women's team down to Mexico. If you remember, we went to Chihuahua. And we played the Mexico national team and the women's Mexico national team in a back-to-back in Chihuahua. But it was arena. It wasn't – so it was with boards. And it was – from the men's side, it was the first time the men had won down there in like 20 years. So, I mean, that that alone was a huge step forward leading up to this tournament. But earlier this year, and I wasn't able to go on the trip, but Craig took the men's team to Slovakia for a tournament, a mini football tournament, and they won it in Slovakia. That's what accelerated the run up to that life.
Wow.
But when you get to a competition like a World Cup, you've got 32 nations there. You got the environment. All bets are off. Anybody can be the underdog. Anybody can be the hero.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype going in, but in each game, you live and die through the decisions you make. And sometimes you win, and sometimes you don't. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of hindsight that is going to go into the trip of things we could do differently the next time. But when I look back on this tournament, the things I'm going to think about is more who I was with, the time we had, the competition, the new friends that we made, getting to experience a different culture. It's just, it goes beyond just the game. It goes into every part of it as well. The friendships, the human side of the game. That's what is going to stay with me.
And that is rightly so, because that's where relationship is formed, is the bond, the going to the trenches together, experiencing that different culture side by side for the first time, taking on the competition, leaving it out on the field, and then afterwards going to dinner, down the street and around the corner, and ordering food that you've never even seen before.
Or going into Dubai and seeing some of
or going into Dubai.
Unbelievable sights in that city.
Yeah, just wow. Just the whole experience. So back to the field a little bit. You sort of angled in this direction. So I kind of know your answer, but how do our players, man for man, in the current major arena soccer league, fare man for man versus some of the players, the major teams like Hungary and Romania and the Czech Republic, that are playing this style of mini football on a more regular basis?
I think we match up. I mean, if you think about any of our professional levels of soccer in the United States, and then you pull a national team out of it, and this is nothing negative against our men's national team, but I think on a world scale, there's no team that we can't beat on any given day.
Right.
Just because the level of experience that we have with our indoor game and how well it translates into the mini football world. I will always think in the back of my head, if we would have beat Romania, it would have changed our path through the playoffs, and it could have been us in that final game instead of Romania.
Yep.
But again, we are respected on a world scale for what we bring to the field.
That's true. And yes, you're right, because you would have, instead of facing the Czech Republic, you would have faced Thailand, and it would have been an incredibly different situation going forward through the opening or the earlier elimination time. So what I'd like you to tell me about is pull out one personal event, one outing that happened while you were in Dubai, or in the UAE, that just sort of stands out.
Oh gosh, for me personally, it was just the last day of before we were, there was a small group of us that flew out early, so we went into Dubai, and just because we weren't in Dubai, we were about an hour and 20 minutes outside of Dubai where the tournament was being held.
Right.
So having an opportunity to spend the day in Dubai was just like an icing on top of the entire event, because it would have really been difficult to carry a loss. You're knocked out. And in the past, when I was with U.S. Soccer, when we would get knocked out of CONCACAF, 5 o'clock the next morning, we're on our way to the airport to get on a plane to get out of Dodge. And I remember we lost to Guatemala in Guatemala City to knock us out of the tournament in 2012. And on our way to the airport, every time we stopped at a stop sign, the Guatemalans would come up with their newspapers about how they beat the U.S. and stick them on our bus window. And that was our parting gift. Where, instead of being shuffled out of the country immediately, we got to decompress. We got to relax, go into Dubai, enjoy the sights, kind of unwind a bit, let some of the sting settle. So that to me is what was probably the best part. Because there's that, when you're in a competition like that, the level of stress is high. It doesn't subside. Every game counts. Every game has reason. But when all of that is done, and you're processing the emotions, but then you get to have like this parting gift of exploring this really cool city with these guys that you've now bonded with for almost 2 weeks. That's special, and I'll keep that for a long time.
I think it's appropriate to finish this off with a shout out to my co-admin here at MASL Off the Wall. Sydney Newsonoff was your roommate for this outing and event and life experience. Just share a little bit of experience rooming with my brother Sydney.
Sydney and I first, we were both in the Ukraine together, and we shared this room that I have a walk-in closet in my house that was bigger than this room that Sydney and I shared. It was that small. But when you are that close to each other for the time we were there, you can't help but develop a friendship. But no, it's just, that was an opportunity for me to get to know Sid on different levels and peel back some of the layers. And he's a really, really genuine person. I wanted him as my roommate when I found out he was coming to Dubai with us, because we just get along really well. He's a special guy.
Yeah. He is a very passionate fan of the arena soccer, indoor soccer game. He's been a part of it for years. He's the reason why we have an indoor soccer Hall of Fame. And it's a huge. He and I bounce heads on a few things, but we love the game of indoor soccer passionately, and we both have a long history with it. So I just thought it was pretty fun that Mark Litton got to hang out with Sydney on some off the field adventures.
Yes, and some I can't share with you. No.
Well, that's part of. See, one of the things I've learned, Mark, is that's part of the conversation I have with people quite frequently, because it's a small community, brother, and when people get to know each other, they get to know each other on very friendly, personal levels where friendship happens, and words are shared in confidence, and that kind of thing is to be kept and held.
Yes.
And I appreciate that strongly, because I have a lot of those myself. Mark Litton, I just want to thank you for joining me today. It's really a pleasure to talk with you. I think the only time that we've actually gotten a chance to meet one another was at the championship game in Milwaukee. where we ran into each other for a little bit. And I appreciate you very much, and seeing your name and seeing your profession being thrown around, what you do for this game is outstanding. And thank you for joining me today.
I appreciate it. I'm very happy that I was able to share my journey with you.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Until the next time we're able to talk or bump fists together, I'll look forward to that, and keep going on, buddy. I'll talk to you later. Okay.
Thanks, Sonny. Take care. I appreciate it.
All right, Mark Litton. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.